statewide for Republicans, and I think it's the same for Democrats, if you get 60% of those delegates, you're the nominee, period. End of story. Okay? That's it. That's it. If you get 60%, you're on the ballot in November as a Republican, okay? So if I get 60%, I'm on the ballot. I don't have to have a primary. The rest of the Republicans in the state, 700,000 of them, don't have to vote.
I refer to this as poison power, the political forces behind government corruption, and to hold these responsible and accountable. So I'd like to welcome Phil Lyman and Tracy Helverson to the Wellness Crusaders KMMU. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Phil. How are you?
Doing great, Lori. And yeah, thanks for the invitation, and huge fan of what you do on this show on a regular basis. And I know this is a little bit of a diversion, but it's so important. So thanks.
It is. So I know we have a lot to go over today. So I am actually going to ask you a couple of questions. So the first question I'd like to ask you, Phil, is how do you define what a Utah United States citizen is?
Well, if you're going to be a Utah citizen, number one, you have to have citizenship in the United States, natural born, or have gone through the process of immigration legally. And in Utah, it means you reside in Utah, and that your home is Utah. This is where you live, and that would make you a Utah citizen.
Okay. So you don't think illegals could be counted as a Utah citizen?
No, by definition, that is not a Utah citizen. That's an illegal immigrant. That's not a citizen.
Okay. And then the next question I have for you is, again, what is meant by the word resident in the state of Utah?
There are a few different definitions of resident, but mainly it means that you have a home here where you intend, if it's your primary residence, that's where you intend to return to when you leave, even for an extended period of time. It's still your residence. That's your home. It's where you eat, sleep, like say, and plan to return to. It's usually where your driver's license is registered. You're in that state. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay.
Is that right? Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it, Phil, is there a certain percent, your driver's license, but is there a certain percentage of time that you have to reside? 50%, 60%?
So I'm a CPA, so for tax purposes, there's that's, I guess I'm giving you the definition there. But if you were to move from another state to Utah, but you didn't live here over the 180 days, then you'd be considered a part-year resident. And then the question comes up. So somebody could live in Utah, move to Hawaii, but if they keep their home in Sandy and they come back for Thanksgiving and they do these things, Utah, the tax commission would say, well, we think you're still a Utah resident and you should pay taxes here. Even if they got a Hawaii driver's license, Utah might say, wait a second, you're just having a long vacation in Hawaii. Your residence is still here, and then they do certain residency tests. And it's really interesting. I mean, this is really going off, but for higher education, for college, residency is a different qualification. And being a San Juan County commissioner, we learned that if you're a Native American who resides on a reservation in Utah or adjacent to Utah, they consider you a resident for tuition purposes. So say you live on the Navajo reservation, but you live in Arizona, you want to go to the University of Utah, they would consider you a resident for those purposes. And we ran into that because we had a person running for office who did not live in Utah, but claimed to be a resident of San Juan County. And that's kind of the test that they applied, incorrectly, but they applied it anyway.
Well, Native Americans have separate sets of rules because they are considered separate nation states in and of themselves from the way the country was founded. But if you were to take anybody else and they go to university or college or trade school or whatever in another state, and they could be gone 12 months in a row, that university is going to charge them out-of-state tuition because they are not a resident of that state. They would be a resident, in this case, of Utah. So you hit you define this the way legally you are. A resident is somebody who, by definition, resides within that state, has documents certifying that they have a primary place of residence in that state. And then to be a U.S. citizen, you either have to be born in the United States, and you have to be an age majority to qualify fully, or if you were not born in the United States, you have to take the oath of allegiance to the United States. And so that very clearly covers any of the questions that people have about people illegally in the country that have not taken that oath of allegiance to the country. They have, by all manners, an allegiance to another nation. And, we don't vote in their elections. They should not be voting in ours.
Agreed. All right, Jim, you're
Right.
up.
Good.
So I know we're going to get into the filings you guys have made with the Supreme Court and how we got to that spot. My initial question to you is, because there's a lot of confusion, because Governor Cox and Deidre Henderson, who are in charge of the election, which is sort of like putting the quarterback in charge of the refereeing of a game, they have basically allowed other Lymans to run as write-in candidates as well as you. And my understanding was all I had to do was write in Lyman, and now I think it has to be Phil Lyman or they'll just kick those ballots. And if you're listening and you don't know that's happened, the two people that are the other Lymans are a mom and son team. I think he lives in the basement of mom's house, and she's going to be the lieutenant governor, and this young man is running as governor. So it's just a tactic to screw the election up even more than it is. How do I vote for Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen on my ballot?
The standard there is the intent of the voter. So it has to be clear that they intended to vote for Phil Lyman, and it's a single ticket. If they don't put on Natalie Clausen, that doesn't affect the governor's race or the lieutenant governor's race. So they can put in Phil Lyman. A few people have said, you got to make sure you darken in the little bubble. The clerks that I've talked to said, no, anything written in that space throws that ballot over to adjudication. It's clear that they voted for Phil Lyman. But I've heard lots of people saying, just to be sure, I'm putting in the bubble, I'm writing Phil Lyman, I'm writing Natalie Clausen. And everybody that has reached out to me, that's what they're showing. I just barely came from a hearing suing Richard and Carol Lyman, which I have no pleasure in suing anybody ever, but we sued them, and they, as of 5 o'clock today, they're supposed to withdraw. But that still leaves the question as still, if somebody writes Lyman on their ballot, is it clear that they intended to vote for Phil Lyman? These guys haven't campaigned, they haven't done anything. Now they're withdrawing from the race. That was in the court order, but the court can't order clerks who aren't, have no standing in the case. She can't order them to respect just the Lyman, that it means Phil Lyman, but that's what both parties have agreed to. So it may get a little bit simpler, but for all intents and purposes, Jim, Phil Lyman, at least. Natalie Clausen, if you want to add her on, that's good too. I had somebody the other day that said, hey, they sent me a picture of their ballot. They said, hey, I just voted for Phil Lyman and Trent Staggs. So they put Trent Staggs in as the lieutenant governor. I thought, okay, that's going to be kind of confusing, but
All right, just so we're 100% clear, I'm going to fill the bubble in so that's not kicked for any reason, and I'm going to write Phil Lyman.
Yeah.
and that should be good enough.
That should be good enough.
Okay.
Can I
Hey, Phil.
piggyback off? Oh, sorry, Steve. Could
Well, I'm
I?
just going to do a follow-up, Lori, on
Okay, perfect.
Um,
I'll do a follow-up right after you.
that. Phil, Steve Aced here, and hi, Tracy. I wanted to follow up on that. From my viewpoint, it would seem that this is election interference from the Cox campaign for sure. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is election interference if they, on the part of the Lymans, if they have no intent of actually running. If it was purely to create chaos, then it is election interference. If they were induced to run, then potentially it's a bribery issue, which could be a problem. And if they were induced by the Cox campaign, which is what the original report that we got from text messages, and that's going to be, we still have discovery, so in our lawsuit we'll still get. If it was the Cox campaign that was inducing them to put their name on to create the interference in the first place, then you've got like three layers of criminal interference.
So just to be clear, then it was understood by me and many others that I know that indeed it was the Cox campaign, but there's no cold hard evidence to that effect at the state.
I mean, that's really the reason for the lawsuit, is to get discovery, and we haven't gotten that yet. I believe there's at least a federal criminal investigation going on, but of course that's going to be, they don't talk to me about that, but I believe that's happening, and evidence suggests that there is an investigation taking place at the federal level. And so they may get the discovery, they may find out what's going on there. It may be, weeks or months before anybody in the public hears about the results of that, but and maybe we'll never hear about it. It's just happening.
Well, I pray that they get to the bottom of it and that they actually do their duty and follow through with that.
Well, it's really important to us because any criminal element in this, and we feel like there's lots of criminal elements through this whole thing, it changes it from, campaigning and election, strategy to, cheating and criminal activity.
Yeah.
But I think that changes the whole remedy, and also the legislature is always saying, well, anything we do is prospective. We can't go back on a technicality and change something. So everyone's like just pushing the narrative. This is unintentional. This just happened. Let's just make sure that we put bills in place so that next year or 4 years from now, we don't have these same issues up, and we'll make it a better system. And that's what the legislative audit. That's their purpose. But they gave us some real nuggets in there that we can go after. So we're certain. I'm certain that there's a lot of malfeasance that goes on in our elections.
How can the general public obtain a copy of that report?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, if you go to OLAG, well, you can't see that, olag.utah.gov. That's the Office of the Legislative Auditor General, and all of his reports are on there. And there's the most recent ones are up at the top, and this is about the fourth one down. And it says that state signature verification process. And so that's what, yeah. So
I'm wondering, Lori, if there's any way we can get that up on the screen so any of the viewers might take a look at that.
Hey, Leighton, can you see if you can pull that up? Thank you. A follow-up question to the ballots. We've all noticed the hole in the envelope. So a suggestion actually from our daughter was to flip it upside down, and then you couldn't see it. What have you been talking about with the hole in the envelope that people can see either your name or Natalie's name?
Yeah, so somebody early on sent us a copy of their Salt Lake ballot, and they said, "Look, when I put my ballot in the envelope, and you got this little sight hole, which I guess is there to see if there's a ballot inside. So they call it a sight hole. And if you put your ballot in there, it's right over Natalie's name, so you can see that Natalie Clausen was written in. If you flip that over, then you go to the site hole on the back, and it's still right over Natalie Clausen's name. And we thought, well, that seems weird, but could be a coincidence. Then we got the same thing from Utah County. The hole is in a whole different place, but so is the write-in section, and it shows right through that hole. And then we got the same thing from Wasatch County, and the hole's in a whole different place, and it's right over the top of the write-in. So there's 3 for 3 that we saw. When I got mine, so I went and checked my ballot in San Juan County. They've got a site hole, but that site hole is it lines up with nothing on the ballot that you could identify. And I'm certain that any clerk or any, at any level, somebody that's doing that, they would say, now you need to make sure that that site hole is at a place where it's not able to reveal what's on the ballot. Instead, it feels like they're saying, let's make sure that site hole can tell us if there's a write-in candidate on this. And the post office, we've had reports of thousands of ballots being destroyed at the post office. Again, these are all conspiracy theories, but when you see some of the things that would facilitate that, it seems like, well, that seems really unnecessary to put your site hole exactly where it needs to be to see who's filled in a write-in.
I'm going to pause you just a moment. And the term conspiracy theory, I think, has been thrown around so loosely and inappropriately in the last several years by people who do not understand that conspiracy is a legal term. It's not something that was made up by a politician or mainstream media or anything else. Conspiracy is a legal term that means that more than one person or party got together with the intent of doing something that was illegal. The federal government is the first group in the 1800s that used it for murder charges. So I think when you say conspiracy theory, I want maybe for people to cautiously step back from that term, because we've been using it. I haven't been, but a lot of people have been using it as if it's something that's invalid. When you say that there are a number of things that have been going on which raise levels of questions about potentially different people interacting, while that is a conspiracy, the way that it's been so abused in our society is to suggest that you're stating that means that it's invalid on face value, and that's the exact opposite of what this term means legally. And this is where we're at, is the legal world. So even though the general public may have heard these terms used incorrectly, it's important that people realize that it is in fact a legal conspiracy if more than one party got together to do something that is a violation of the law. And you mentioned a couple possibilities. That's the reason why they're investigated. Everybody deserves the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes even if you deserve the benefit of the doubt, you're going to get the wrong side of the law anyway. But we'd like to pretend, at least, that we give people the benefit of the doubt. So I just want to say that so that people who might have heard that term, somebody might have run with it and say, well, that means it's not valid, and that's not what that means. If I could proceed maybe from that with a question to you, because this is important, because you have now filed with the Supreme Court of the United States, what everybody wants to call SCOTUS, a case, and I believe you've also filed an injunction, perhaps, to encourage the Supreme Court to take a look at it. And Utah is in the 10th Appellate Court, so that's Gorsuch. That is your Supreme Court justice to look at anything filed. What's your intent or hope that Justice Gorsuch will do in response to seeing your case?
Well, I'll give you my response, then Tracy can jump in on this one. But the right of association is not a small thing when it comes to these political parties, especially a political party. And for the GOP to say, this is how we're going to select our candidate, and then for Utah legislature to come in and say, unless you want to do an end run around that whole process, then you get signatures, and it obligates the GOP to take a completely different course. That's really, I think it's the heart of our case, is to say, is to get a ruling on that, to say, no, the state legislature doesn't override the GOP's process. If they did that, then that would say, well, they picked a convention winner, free and clear of anybody else, and that should go on the general ballot.
And this mechanism, just for clarification, so that then Tracy can address and go from there forward, is SB Senate Bill 54, correct? That was passed in, was it 2014?
2014, yeah.
Yeah, so we're hoping that they ask or they answer a question of, did the Utah Supreme Court go against their ruling in a New York Board of Elections versus Lopez Torres?
Mm-hmm.
The Utah Supreme Court, when they ruled on Phil's petition, they took a very small portion of that case and twisted it to fit the narrative. And so we're asking, hey, we're asking for their supervisory authority to clarify SB 54. Did they make a mess of your ruling? Because they're pretty much saying that a state can veto a delegates and a convention of political parties nominating procedures and essentially put someone else in the place of what the party wanted to do.
And that's a very important question for the Supreme Court to have, because what we're talking about is not just the laws of Utah. What we're talking about is the Constitution of the United States of America. And, as I've harped in probably too many settings, the Constitution of the United States is a compact agreement between the states and a federal government, so that when you want to become a state, you have to agree to the rules that have been laid down, and the federal government then has to agree with the rules that have been provided for state governments. And one of the questions before we got on the air was, I asked Tracy if she was familiar with Article 4, Clause 1, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which is the States and Election Clause, where the federal government laid out what a state must do, which is to define when, where, and how people can get to the voting process. But it also locked in what the states could do by defining what power they had, the location, the time, all of that, but not in interference with the parties. And, in quoting from some of the federal legislation, it's been noted that the framers understood that the Elections Clause and a grant of authority to issue procedural, as a grant of authority to issue procedural regulations, right? And not the power to dictate electoral outcomes. And the case that you referred to, which was decided in 2008, so 6 years before the state of Utah passed SB 54. 6 years before that, the Supreme Court of the United States in New York State Board of Elections v. Lopez Torres concluded that parties have a right to determine how they're going to choose their candidates. If you then want to go around that, you can. As I mentioned beforehand, Robert Kennedy Jr. wanted to be he wanted to be considered as a Democratic candidate for president. And the Democratic Party said, no, you're not in on that. And so that's an example I think most people are aware of, where a party has said, we get to choose our candidate. We get to choose how we go about that. There's nothing that says there can only be two candidates. There's nothing that says you can't run as an independent. But parties also have these rights, and that's what the Supreme Court said in 2008. And it's stunning to me that you find yourself in a situation in Utah where Utah has agreed in this compact of a constitution to follow the rules. Those rules under Article 3 state that the Supreme Court makes the law of the land. And that goes all the way back to the beginning of this country with a case known as Marbury v. Madison, where the Supreme Court basically said, listen, we decide what the laws are. If the federal Congress doesn't like that, then they have to rewrite a law that takes into account what the Supreme Court says. But you have something even more egregious here, where you have a state deciding it's going to make a law that violates the rule of law. And by essence, it violates the US Constitution, because Article 3 says the Supreme Court is in charge of the laws of the land. You have a legislative body that makes the laws, you have an executive body that's responsible for carrying them out, and you have a judicial branch that's responsible for saying what goes with the Constitution or what doesn't. And the states can't step aside. So, number of the I've read through your brief, your memorandum of law, but your brief, as most people call it, to look at it, and the cases are all pre-Supreme Court ruling, which means the Supreme Court took them into consideration. One of the questions, Steve, you asked this beforehand, was a question about whether, because the Republican Party might have taken money, that somehow that negates the Republican Party's autonomy. And I would argue that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and all the parties that have existed have taken money from the federal government. The Supreme Court knew that in 2008 when it made its federal ruling, and therefore, it's encapsulated in that ruling. If somebody wants to make an argument outside of that, good luck. I wish them all the best of that, because I can tell you, if I were sitting on the Supreme Court, this would be a slam dunk. In fact, I think there's a real question about the validity of the election going on in Utah. I think, quite frankly, the only way that this does not become, and I'm not a member, I'm not a resident of Utah, so I'm not voting in this election, but I think the only way that you do not end up with this as a Supreme Court case down the line is if Mr. Lyman here is the one that's elected by the people. Because if Cox is elected, they have just pushed aside a Supreme Court ruling. It's going to go up to Supreme Court done properly, and the Supreme Court's going to say, well, Mr. Cox, you did not have the authority of the political party to put you in, and yet you ran as a Republican. If the Democratic opponent comes in and does it, the question's going to be, did the vote get split because of all this chaos that was caused, again, by an inappropriate law, SB 54, and Cox taking advantage of it? Mr. Cox, I don't know him from Adam, but if I were his legal advisor, and I'm not, I would have told him not to put an R behind his name or to run as a Republican, because now he's basically told the Republican Party, it doesn't matter what you want, I'm running the show. And I've read SB 54, I've read the other rulings, or at least gone through them rapidly, given the number of days, I think 2 days that I've had and 1 day for some of it, to go through. And I honestly think that unless Mr. Lyman here is elected, you've got a Supreme Court case which may be the first true legitimate question about election integrity case that pops up on the book that people can't say, they can't find an argument around, because the Supreme Court has already ruled on this, and that was 2008. So we're going on 16 years. And the Supreme Court hasn't recanted itself. So I've opined on that, which is my job as an attorney, to opine even when people don't want me to. Too bad I can't use that one on my children. Tracy, you're chuckling, but so I'll defer and let you speak, because I know you've been actively involved with this, and you have a right to represent the CPA who's sitting to your left.
Well, and Justice Scalia in that case was very adamant when he gave his opinion to force a candidate or force a party to a direct primary turns the First Amendment on its head. And the government is so, they think they're untouchable in Utah. And that's why, I mean, one justice just totally dismisses his petition and doesn't even give him a chance in court, which could have helped resolve it way before the ballots went out. So but those justices are picked by governors and put in by legislatures. So the first one justice had to recuse himself because his wife works for Cox, and the other one just dismissed it as fast as he could and made up a reason. And another trick in Utah that they try to trick you is if one justice does kick it, you can have a chance to have it reviewed. Well, it's a trick. It pushes you right back down into the lower courts, the Utah Appellate Court, which why would you want to go down? And that's why Phil went out. He wanted to get out of Utah because we need the supervisory authority of the Supreme Court at this point.
Well, and I think the fact that you've now filed this, you have basically put the timeline on this that you can now go back to, and I think somebody, if I remember correctly, one of the prior 10th Circuit Court of Appeals rulings from one of the judges suggested that it was probably time that this be forwarded to the Supreme Court for a real ruling. Now, I guess I would argue the Supreme Court's already done a real ruling on this, but it is, I'm somewhat surprised by the legislative body of Utah passing a law in conflict with federal law, which is what it is once the Supreme Court's ruled on it. So I think for the benefit of Utah, unless they really want to go through a fairly embarrassing process before the Supreme Court, Mr. Lyman, you probably should be, for the benefit of the people in the state, being the one that they actually write in. I can't speak for other people, but I would say if I was sitting in a state and the guy, is Cox your governor right now?
He is.
And this is so, and excuse my ignorance here, but the office you're running for is
Governor.
Okay. So I wanted to make certain of that. So the man that is governor has taken advantage of a law that is illegal to try to maintain himself as governor instead of honoring the party that he claims he's a part of and doing his best to have the legislature of Utah correct a law that shouldn't be there to begin with to avoid the embarrassment of Utah before the nation, which, maybe they're not worried about. But if I were in your state, I would be worried about it. If I were a Utahn, is that the correct term? If I were a Utahn, is that it? Right? A Utahn. I would want my government to get its act together and correct a law that shouldn't be there. And I would not, I certainly would not vote for the executive, the governor of the state, to put him back in, having violated this and supported this SB 54, which is unconstitutional given the Supreme Court's ruling. In fact, if I were him, I would embarrassingly at this point in time probably start making public policy statements about having erred and done something wrong.
Exactly.
And perhaps we can find a way of working together and trying to reach out to, because my naivety here is that my perspective is that the executive or anybody elected by the people should be doing what he or she thinks is best interest of the people you're working for. I've said that about Donald Trump, that I think he has the best interest of the country. You know, you may not like him on some point of view, and you know, despite my charming demeanor on here, people don't always like me, or at least all my aspects. But you know, the reality is, you want to do the right thing for the right people, or thing for the people, and it's, you know, it's very clear that this legislation and your current governor is not doing that for the people of Utah.
I'll add to that, Dr. Fleming, because he was involved in every case that was around SB 54. He was involved in it, and he knew better that you could not force a person, and he's an attorney, so he knows better.
Yeah, you just hate those attorneys.
To add a little context to that, the current governor was the lieutenant governor when SB 54 was being imagined, let's say, right? And so it seems to me that it was kind of set up so he could be governor to perpetuity, to me.
You're right, Steve. He was appointed in 2014, and that's when SB 54 got passed.
The real kicker here, though, is you said the magic term. He's an attorney. So he is supposed to have, somewhere in law college, taken a constitutional law course in which he's supposed to learn not to promote overriding the U.S. Constitution, not to, and if you're going to deal with something that the Supreme Court's ruled on, you have to write the law to address, you know, usually it's the dissenting justices that will tell you, if you want to get around this, this is maybe what you need to think of. But I've read your SB 54, sadly. And there's nothing in it that suggests that they responded to the 2008 Supreme Court case. So they wrote a law. Steve, you mentioned the man was in power at the time, writing a law as an attorney that he knows, and if he doesn't know, he needs to go back and get his money back, because that degree wasn't, you know, I don't know where he went to law college. You know, I went to Concord at Purdue, but you know, not everybody likes Purdue, so okay. But I think maybe he needs to get his money back, and I think he needs to apologize to the state of Utah, because now he's dragging. It's an embarrassment. It's like having a bad family fight and you did something you shouldn't have done, and now the entire family has to look at it. So I think maybe Governor Cox needs to be looked at as the guy who came to the family reunion and did something extremely embarrassing during the reunion, and now everybody has to go home and live with it.
Yep.
You know, you mentioned Dr. Fleming about the Secretary of State should take some action. We don't have a Secretary of State. The lieutenant governor is over all of the elections, and she's on the same ticket with the governor. So really, the governor oversees the governor's election, and that's another issue here.
Well, hopefully Washington and Lee will get an apology letter from him.
I wasn't going to mention the name, but I knew where he went to college.
You know, you're never going to get that kind of an apology from this governor. But, you know, I want to applaud Phil publicly for doing what's necessary to finally ferret this whole mess out, because the state legislature is part of the problem, quite honestly. They're the ones that passed this law, and they are the ones that continue to perpetuate it and refuse to do anything about it. And I think there's been several of us, including Phil, kind of spearheading this whole effort to get this changed and not have the fox watch the hen house, so to speak.
And the Republican Party in Utah has some. They should have stood up and defended their party, and they haven't. And they've been disappointing to me.
Well, I think we've seen the political parties in this country embarrass themselves over and over and over again. I mean, you have a situation where the most likely candidate to win the 2024 presidential election is really most embraced by, and so if anybody wanted to know this, I guess knock yourself out, you're going to hear it. those of us who were Democrats, and we're very proud of the Democratic Party because we date back and we think of JFK when we do that. And sadly, as so many now have commented, the Democratic Party has not stayed true to the ideals of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I would argue the Republican Party has been doing an atrocious job of staying up with its standards. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to learn terms like rhino, which, I have to learn these terms because to understand what the heck is going on. It speaks to the fact that you really have to look at the individual and determine whether they're honest and objective. And I've made this statement with Donald Trump during his first term that the vast majority of people that he brought into his administration were people that said, yes, we care about the United States of America. And he took that to mean, well, when he said it, he meant it. So didn't they mean it? And they sabotaged and stabbed him in the back and cost him 4 years and plus of agony. And so it's, one of the problems we have in the country are people who claim that they believe in something, but all they're doing is telling individuals what they want to hear. I'm not sure who Mr. Cox is talking to in his process, but if the people are really interested in the integrity of Utah, whatever you consider that to be in your own mind, I would be hard pressed to find a reason for why you would vote for somebody who, as the executive and the lieutenant governor, also in the executive office, put your state on the chopping block, put in legislation that violates what the federal laws are, and then do this for whatever you think your personal gain is. Because I'm a firm believer that if you stand behind principles, that should be what carries you in the end, because that is what you're going to have to fall back on. And I think it's very clear that Mr. Cox does not have these principles, and he has nothing to fall back on. Mr. Lyman, I can only speak to what I know you've gone through. Again, congratulations for President Trump coming forward and undoing a harm done to you.
Thank you.
And this is an opportunity, I think, for you to pay back the country. You've been given this gift by President Trump. You've been given the gift of being, a CPA.
Yes, right
okay.
on.
Couldn't possibly account. No, I just.
Woohoo!
But that's okay. I mean, you're running against an attorney, so it's like, JD's cause problems. And in this case, the guy is, right? So I don't want to take up all the show, but I think, it's obvious that Tracy's in your corner. She's doing this work for you. It's obvious that
amazing work, yes.
There's people on the program here from Utah that are in your corner. But I think, if I have a voice that is helpful, is to say, what's the term? I don't have any skin in the game or dog in the whatever these things are. There's these expressions that basically say, I'm not going to benefit from it, but as I look at it objectively, legally, the man has gone out of his way to help make a law that breaks the Constitution established by the Supreme Court of the United States. And that's not a man that you put into office. And I guess for Jim's statement, write in Phil Lyman, not just Lyman. Okay. Go ahead.
I have a follow-up question to that. Before we go on to talking about the SCOTUS, do you think that Spencer Cox should resign to save face?
Are you asking? Oh, go ahead.
Whoever wants to answer. I mean, I know what my opinion is. I think you should, but
my opinion, Utahns should demand it, because that's not how Utah believes. I mean, we're even outside, we're looked on as being Christian, a very Christian and religious state, and how embarrassing that we have a governor that, to me, frankly, is lying. He's an attorney. He knows better. And he knew that he could not go forward when he won at convention. It was the party already got their nominee. And for him to keep pushing the narrative and confuse the people of why he got to go is terrible. And I think the people should demand that he resign and that the legislature impeach him, because we do have impeachment in our laws, but our legislature is so run by one ruler, and they do whatever he does, that they don't do their actual job. And the people need to start demanding it, that they do their job, and he needs to be impeached. And it's embarrassing that he has done this to our state.
If it's illegal, could he possibly face criminal charges?
Yes,
From what Dr. Fleming has been saying.
yes, because I looked at it, and under section 407, it allows for the party to elect them at the convention, and then they go on. It was illegal to put their names on that ballot. It's called a counterfeit ballot, and Utah code deals with it. And then they put it in the mail. So you've got a federal offense too, because they did a counterfeit ballot to trick people to think that they were on the ballot for the primary, and then they put it in the mail. And then he didn't get signatures, and they did it a second time for the general election. They commit crime after crime after crime all the time, and we need to start holding them accountable, because that's what they're committing.
That's the key, Tracy. For me, it's the accountability.
Mm-hmm.
We see it not only here in Utah but nationally. Crime after crime after crime is committed. But that only matters so long as they're held accountable. And no one is willing to step up to the plate, and, federally or in the state, until Phil, and start putting the pressure on to hold them accountable. And that's what we need. And quite honestly, I think the electorate here is quite ignorant. And they need to educate themselves. They need to pull their head out of the sand, look at the reality of what's going on. They don't want to see the bad. They only want to see the good things happening here, and they don't want to acknowledge the bad.
Well, and so much of it, dealing with my colleagues in the legislature has been, like just watching me fight this fight. And the big message has been, do you care about whether this is illegal or not? Am I the only one? Is it just because I'm running for office? Can you see that it puts me in an awkward position when I'm the one running for office? And I'm also trying to fight this fight. And I didn't run for governor because I wanted to be the governor. I ran for governor really to fight this fight, to expose that. It turns out that it's a really good platform. People find it really compelling to say, hey, somebody's actually going to fight the fight. So they really work well together. But to their credit, the key people in the legislature asked for the legislative audit. I think it was to shut me up, to say, we're going to call your bluff, just go away. So they do the legislative audit, and it comes out, lo and behold, the legislative auditors say, it appears that Spencer Cox likely did not get his signatures. Now they want me to just say, hey, well, that's okay, that's not a problem. And it's like, it's out of my hands at this point, kind of to your point, Lori. So I think enough people are seeing what's going on, and with what Tracy's filed, it's not something that Phil Lyman has to go and, push and push and push. And if I decide I'm not going to push anymore, that it just goes away. I think it's really blatant and really obvious.
And I think it's really important that people quit saying, when is somebody in the system going to correct the problem?
Mm-hmm.
I so very seldom do this in public, but I'm really tired of everybody else expecting people in the system to do their job. If you want people in the system to do their job, then you, in this case, the people, the citizens of Utah, need to do your job. And the only thing that people are asking you to do is to vote. Now, you can stick your head in the sand, you can become better educated, or you can do a variety of things. but to just get upset because other people in Utah are not fixing the problem is to shirk your responsibility. You don't have to. Nobody's asking you to go to war. Nobody's asking you to build a structure that you can't build. People are asking you to go vote. And if you have any questions about your governor doing illegal things, independent of asking whether you can hold him criminally accountable or do any of a number of things, you should be asking, why aren't you getting out there and voting against the man and voting in this case,
Agreed.
if you think Mr. Lyman is the person, to go vote for it, right? I mean,
Well, he got 67% of the votes at the state convention. He is the person.
right. So it begs the question, and even with this manipulation, what you're saying is that Cox didn't even get the number of votes that he needed.
Dr. Fleming, he was booed so bad on the off the stage the first time that I'm sorry, he couldn't find his man.
Then I
to come
expect
back up on the stage for the second one that he sent a puppet out.
Then I expect the citizens of Utah to boo him again when they go to the polls. And as Donald Trump would frequently say, I expect the people of Utah to go to the polls and register a vote that says, Mr. Cox, you're fired.
So
I like it.
one of the things that bothered me this week was, and I don't know that everybody knows this in the state, but there's a Government Records and Accountability Act that allows you, it's the GRAMA board, you can come get, it's like a FOIA request for Utah. And I went to the meeting where Phil had requested to be able to look at the signatures and validate them because it impacts his race and the will of the caucus system, which elected him. He was more than 60+1. He was 67% of the vote.
And I'm sorry.
7.54, actually.
And I think that people don't understand that Cox's office is the one that appoints the 5-person panel for the GRAMA board. And the judges that they go in front of when you have a legal question are also appointed by Cox's office. Deidre Henderson, who is running with Cox as the lieutenant governor, is in charge of the election. That's like putting the referee in charge of the game in the lineup of players.
So is everybody appointed in the state of Utah? Or do you actually vote for anybody?
I don't think so. The thing that bothered me this week, though, was Deidre came out and made a big press conference out of doubt the doubters. Well, I'm a doubter, and you know how you remedy that for me? Release the signatures. Mm-hmm. If you won, what's the harm? Show it, but they won't. And anybody and everybody should be asking the same question.
Yeah.
What are you hiding?
Doubt the doubters is cute. My youngest son and I had a conversation earlier today. He's 31, by the way, for people that think he's really too young. Having these conversations, and he was talking about, one of the problems he has is he's always saying why in science. So when you say doubt the doubters, that's the equivalent of saying don't ask why. Don't ask why. And anybody who asks why, well, they're a doubter. Well, guess what? Everything I've done in my life, or most everything I've done in my life, has been because I've doubted or questioned, and I've gone over and above. So being a doubter, that's a really good thing to do, because the opposite is just being a follower. And this is where I just am reminded of what my parents used to say. I mean, it was just this old stupid saying, if everybody else lined up and jumped off the bridge, would you too? And apparently in the United States of America in 2024, the answer to that is yes. Yes, we would. We would just jump off the bridge, which I'm not opposed to if there's an ocean below it and I'm going to go scuba diving. But otherwise, if there's ground below it, it's not a smart move. You should doubt about the people that are up front jumping off the bridge. And I encourage those people, by the way, if they want to make that leap of faith or whatever you consider that, but don't follow them. Doubt what's going on. Jim, you're exactly right. If it's not like he has to come out and show it to everybody, but there ought to be. Wouldn't you want to vet it? Wouldn't you want to prove to people, hey, you don't think I have these? Let me show them to you. Let's get a group of people, and I will put this task to bed. I will vet myself by demonstrating I was right. And see, you've taken attention off the other issue, which was wrong anyway, the SB 54, and you shifted it to saying, see, I now have the moral high ground. Well, if you won't show those signatures, you don't have the moral high ground. Seriously, people in Utah, you want to vote for somebody who doesn't have the moral high ground, who's playing you, every day of the week, and has, I would say, has plans to continue doing that. Who am I interrupting? Sorry.
No, I'm interrupting you.
No.
I'm just saying there's a culture here in Utah where doubt is often confused with disobedience, and disobedience being very bad. If you doubt something, you're being disobedient, and we've got to get over that mentality because
Good point.
people here use that. People like Cox use it in a nefarious way to take advantage of well-intended good people because they don't want to question the authority here.
Steve,
And I see that as a huge problem that needs to be overcome. And slowly, with time, I think we're getting there, but not fast enough.
Steve, doesn't that speak to agency? Doesn't everybody supposedly have agency to be able to do what they know to be right and true?
Yes, theoretically, Jim, but the culture here precludes that to some extent, and we're expected to fall in line to some degree and not question those that may know better than us.
Well, and I think people have a hard time thinking that someone would do something bad.
Well,
they have a hard time thinking that.
What I would say to those people just on the releasing the signature side of this argument is, if I were Deidre, or Deidre, whatever her name is, I would release the signatures, prove my position, and end Phil Lyman's campaign.
But they can't.
No, and you wouldn't if you did.
They can't.
If they didn't get the signatures, they can't do it. And I think that's what's happened.
It's 100% what's
The
happened.
way they treated
There were, 8 people that verified signatures, and only one of the 8 actually completed the signature verification courses required and certification to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
they would have
And
released them.
Don Gibson used the same company, Gathering Inc., to do the signatures, and 25% of his signatures were invalid. It's the same company, same process, same procedure, same underhanded nonsense.
Yeah.
All great comments.
I'm sorry, Jim, how do you really feel?
Look, I love Utah. I moved my family here, my grandkids, my kids. We came from back east, just outside Chicago in Indiana, and it was the same corruption, just a different state.
Yeah.
Big political machines deciding who gets to be our rulers. And that's not how the Constitution's written.
Right.
So the reason I'm adamant that Phil Lyman becomes governor of Utah, or why I feel so strongly, is he's a principled individual. That's what we need. It's actually how I ended up meeting Dr. Fleming. He was a principled guy that was out there early on. Well, as I got to know you.
Yeah, no cupcakes.
I
for
saw
you.
him on the internet standing up saying, hey, we need to vet the COVID vaccines because something's not right. And somebody built this thing. And he had proof and he had data, and it was objective. It wasn't a gut feeling.
Well, this is the one thing I've found with the legislature is you can rail, you can give fiery speeches on almost any topic except the truth. You get down to the truth. It's like, okay, if I say this, then someone's going to really get hurt or feel it. And so we do as politicians. It's like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. Let's bring this up. But you talk about, elections. It's like, no. We're not talking about that. And everybody should, like move to the other side of the room if somebody over here is talking about it, which has been real confirmation for me in this whole battle to say, this must be a true thing that I'm talking about here, because it alienates so many people in the establishment, in what I call the syndicate. They just move away from you, and then they attack you through the media. It's amazing. So predictable.
It's sad.
It
Yeah.
is. Before we move on to the SCOTUS case, and I think Steve's rebooting his PC, I want to go back to the ballot. So for those of you who are looking at that ballot, Jim, you found that ballot. Do you want to explain it, the hole in it? Or Phil, do you want to talk about like what we're seeing? And that is a Salt Lake County clerk ballot with the hole there.
Yeah, so that little hole is called a sight hole, and it goes all the way through. So it's punched right through. If there was nothing in there, you'd see through to the other side. And if you can, on your own computer, if you zoom in there, you can see that it has. I think it says Natalie. You can see the IE or you can tell there's a write-in in that spot. So.
Do we think this was intentional? Like have the holes in the
Well,
ballots? I don't recall last year.
What should be is intentionally not in that spot. There should be some intention to make sure that does not show any data in there. And it's really easy to do because there's lots of blank space on the ballot. You can put that sight hole anywhere, and when it happens once, you say, well, somebody kind of flubbed up on their job. When it happens in 3 counties and counting, I don't know how many more there are, but in 3 counties where it's exactly over that spot, in different spots, because that's where in different places where
Wasatch, Wasatch is the same.
Wasatch in Utah.
So I think it would be interesting to see in prior years if anybody could find the envelopes from prior years and do a comparison and see, does the hole line up in the same place such that maybe they've just always done it this way, or is the hole now in a different place? Which would raise the question of, wait a minute, if we've been processing these mail-in ballots for many elections, and this is how we were doing them before, now why would the hole punch be someplace?
They did get rid of what they call the privacy sleeve this year. So in previous years, you'd put it in a sleeve and put that in the thing. And I thought that was to avoid people being able to hold it up to the light and see who you voted for, which with this ballot, you can also do that. If you want to hold it up to the light, you can see other stuff. So yeah, that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that California continually sends me my vote in, my mail-in ballot, and I haven't been in California now for about 6 years, but I am grateful for the fact that California constantly sends me my mail-in ballot. Vote early, vote often.
Don't vote for Newsom. So can we move on to because of time constraints, can we move on?
Oh, we have time constraints?
Well, not real. I don't want to, I don't know if Phil does, so I'm trying to be respectful. I know you and I never do because we go to 6 o'clock all the time until they kick us off. So can we
I'm just on the planet sucking up oxygen and blowing off CO2.
So
I'm a CO2 waste. I'm an environmental threat. That's why I carry a tree next to me, so it will suck up the CO2 and blow. Yeah. Go ahead.
So Phil and Tracy, can you talk about the SCOTUS filing?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so we filed with the Utah Supreme Court, a very similar case, basically saying, you can't violate a party's right of association. And that right of association says individuals can make agreements and parties can make agreements, and especially political parties can make agreements. So we filed that, and I'll let Tracy tell more about it, but we filed that with the Utah Supreme Court. And Judge...
what's his name?
Oh, yeah, just went blank. I'll think of it. Durant. Judge Durant issued a thing right away, which, I mean, I appreciate the quickness of it, but he basically issued a thing saying about 5 different straw man arguments. You're arguing this and this and this and that, and we've already said that doesn't apply. This doesn't apply. This doesn't apply. Go away. And so that opened the door for us to go straight to the United States Supreme Court. And this one I think is really very much refined and on point, and right on the front, right, you open up the front and it says the first line in there is about Lopez Torres case, and then a really concise question, and that's basically the case. And then you got another 692 pages adding to that. It's beautiful.
That's why they call it a brief.
Yeah. And these things we had to send 70.
Yeah, we had to print 20 and send 40 to the United States Supreme Court.
So you got 700 pages apiece, and we're binding all these things up, and some really generous people have helped to cover the cost of all that, and we appreciate that. And so yeah, I'll let Tracy tell you a little bit more about her experience on it.
Yeah, because everybody always says in the party, well, we've spent $500,000 trying to determine if SB 54 is unconstitutional, and we couldn't win, so you're not going to win. That's what they keep saying. You're not going to win. We tried, and the point is they just had the wrong party to the case. They had the party to the case, not the individual who holds the constitutional right. The individual holds the constitutional right, but because it had so many cases around it already, around SB 54, we felt comfortable when we talked about it just to go straight up and go directly to and ask for their supervisory authority, because of all the cases and all the hard work that was put in. I mean, there were some great people that fought this when it was first passed. There were some really good patriots fighting against this, and they did. They took it all the way up to the 10th Circuit. The first case, it dismissed the open primary. Part of SB 54 originally had open primaries, and the first case they found that unconstitutional because our primaries are just for Republicans, but they opened them up to anybody can vote for them. That wasn't even a Republican. So they found that unconstitutional. So that case kind of went away. But then they argued, well, no, we get to choose our if our people can gather signatures or not. And that was part of the second case. And the way the case went up, and it went all the way up to the 10th Circuit, and they ruled that it was constitutional because it didn't harm the party, because the party was the only part of the action. And they even said they couldn't rule any further, but Dr. Fleming mentioned this, that Chief Justice Timkovich, he writes a beautiful dissenting brief and explains exactly what is going to happen. And he explains exactly what has happened in our party, how he says this is going to divide this party, it's going to fracture it. And that's what you do when you want to take over something. You wanted to cause division, and it did. It fractured it. And he depicted this very day and said, you're going to get somebody that they nominate at the convention level that the people want, and you're going to go in and put somebody else in it, and you are going to destroy this party. And I think that was the whole purpose of SB 54, is they've always wanted direct primaries. And a direct primary is very harmful to the people of Utah, because we believe in a representative form of government. And the reason why we do is we start at the bottom of the level, and we pick our neighbors to say, hey, help us pick to know who to vote for. I know probably everybody on this call, when elections come, they get a call and say, who do I vote for? Because most people don't pay attention. They don't have time. They've got their children, their family, their work. So that's why we do believe in a representative form of government. But they can control a direct primary. They can control that with big money. And that's what this New York case that we asked about versus Lopez Torres, that exact case was the same situation. There was 2 people that wanted to get elected, and they were mad because they couldn't get elected through the convention process. And so they were demanding a direct primary. And in that case, the 2 lower courts ruled that they could have a direct primary, that it was okay, that it didn't harm anything. It didn't harm the parties. And in this case, which was funny, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party were on the same side. And so,
That's pretty much the case today, Tracy.
yes, it is. So that's what this whole fight was. In this case, it was the exact same thing. SB 54 was created because someone was mad because their type of candidate could never make it through the convention process. They would never get picked because they were too liberal. Well, there is another party you can go join. Go join it. And so that's when Justice Scalia did determine that you could not force a party, and they reversed the 2 lower courts. And I'm hopeful that I think this is a solid case. It's easy. It's one question. We wanted it easy, and it ended up being almost 700 pages because of all the hard work of those people that they did. And I give a shout out to them, that those that fought before and set this case up to be an easy decision.
One of the other things that's really unique about this situation, we haven't had a governor in the history of the state, an incumbent governor, who failed to qualify for the primary at convention. So this is the first time. It's the first time that you have an incumbent governor who couldn't get a 40% threshold, and only one other contender that came out of the primary, or out of the convention. So to force a primary was inappropriate. There should have been no primary. That's the only. So it really is a test case for SB 54.
And Tracy hit on the key point, which was, what was the intent of the people who wrote SB 54? And this is something, I've gone through this with Lori, and maybe Tracy's been on some of these conversations where I've looked at some of the Utah laws and people interpret it one way. And I look at it and say, well, I can see how this law could be used for something completely different. And the question always comes down to, what was the intent of the law? Because, we all talk about, we don't need a bigger government. We don't need more this, that. We don't need more laws. I mean, I'm not in favor of more laws, and yet it seems like I'm constantly putting laws together to potentially be passed because of issues. And I will tell you most of the time exactly what I'm thinking about. And we one of the things you're supposed to learn as a law student is, not that most of them do, but to read the Federalist Papers. Mm-hmm. Why did the Founding Fathers argue and include what they included? What was their intent? What were they concerned about? And so you hit on the topic of, why would SB 54 even need to be passed? And why would you pass a law that violates what the Supreme Court has already ruled on? And if you're an attorney, you don't get that. I mean, I recognize, one of the advantages of not being an attorney is that you get to do stupid with the law, okay? I mean, because the courts will say, yeah, they're pro se, they're not really an attorney. We know they're going to make mistakes. They don't get it. We don't get to do that. Paralegals really don't get to do that. You have a little bit of leeway there. But it's always because the attorney's signing off on it, right? Even though I know that most attorneys, not myself, but most attorneys, it's really the paralegal or the law clerks that's writing the vast majority, but the attorney just needs to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. But, as Jim's pointed out in messages to me, I guess GPT, is that the current thing that people are using, right? GPT, is that the
GPT? Yeah, GPT. Yeah.
GPT. Okay. That apparently he's now a legal scholar because he's doing GPT. Bless your heart. But it's the intent of the law that you have to ask. And I think, you hit, Tracy, right on the button. What was the intent of somebody passing SB 54. And I think we're seeing it. You know, when you can't win by the rules, make a rule, no matter how illegal it is, that allows you to do an end run. And if nobody will hold you accountable, you win, right?
Mhm.
Well, I have news for people. If that's the country we're living in, watch this. Okay. It's going right down the toilet. Okay. Not that it hasn't been, but there is time to actually put the plug back in the drain and fill the sink back up and get the country back afloat.
Yeah.
Did you like that? I did.
Yeah. And to your point, Dr. Fleming, that means the people. We have got to stand up and not only vote, but we've got to tell our legislatures and we've got to demand it that this is wrong. This is
You know, there's a peaceful right of assembly, and maybe the people in Utah need to start using this and walking out in front of your Supreme Court and other places legally, peacefully, but you have the right to assemble. It's, again, that old U.S. Constitution thing. 1776 was when, you know, they started the whole process with the Declaration of Independence, and then, you know, 15 years later or something like that for the Constitution. But yeah, get it together, folks. I'm here in Texas. You know, I still get to vote in California, but I don't, right?
So,
yeah.
Tracy and Phil, I mean, and Phil, I know you were just on Jason's podcast as well. I love his podcast with his wife, Alexia. So what do you want to say about like the solution? I know that Jill Watson was asking to talk about the solutions. What can we do as Utah citizens who feel that our ballots are being stolen, that our rights are being squashed, and that you have this political overreach, you know, poisoned power, as I like to call it? What are some solutions that, one, how do we wake some of the Utahns up? And two, what are some solutions?
Yeah, I think the first is to wake people up, and I say how realization is a huge motivator. Just like when Luke Skywalker found out Leia was his sister, it changed everything in there.
What?
Yeah, did you know that? So people go along and they accept the narrative, and the narrative is, gosh, you know, we're gonna really go to work, and we're gonna put some bills in place, and we're gonna pass some things in. And 4 years from now, you just watch. This is going to be, you know, thank you so much for getting involved. We're going to go and pass some bills. You know, and everybody just stay calm right now, but you know, don't do anything drastic. I told a couple of my legislative friends, because they're saying this would be a good time for you to like step down and really support the party, and you'll keep your influence, you'll keep your your good name, and I said, you think I'm going to lose influence on November 6th? You're going to lose influence on November 6th. You look at what Spencer Cox's platform is. He took my website, and that's his platform, whether it's nuclear energy, which he's down in my hometown today, pushing his nuclear energy ideas. Never pushed it before, against illegal immigration. He's been the biggest proponent of fostering illegal immigration, DEI, climate change. Boys playing in girls sports, all those things that he's done for 8 years as lieutenant governor and then as governor. Now he's saying, I am the champion, and people you have to go along with the accepted narrative and just to reject that. So that's the first.
He uses pronouns, Phil. I mean,
yes,
my
he
goodness,
does.
that's crazy.
Yeah, to middle schoolers, announces his pronouns to middle schoolers in the middle of a culture war where parents are battling, where they're arresting parents at school board meetings for showing up and saying, I don't like what the school board's doing. He gets on, and it's a real strong message. You know, Merrick Garland's calling these parents domestic terrorists. He gets on and uses his pronouns. It's a huge signal to the left and to the that other side of society that I'm with you. You got to.
Well, I think the signal to the left is what you just said. He's picked up the Kamala Harris playbook, which is to take her opponent's views and use that
Oh
as the
yeah,
campaign,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
So
that's what you just said. He's taken everything that you were talking about and now is running with that. So the people are looking and saying, well, what's the difference between the candidates? Well,
yeah,
one actually came up with the plan and the other one stole the plan.
yeah. So the realization happens. Then what do? I think you have to contact your legislators. And some people say call them and tell them to disqualify Cox. Well, they can't disqualify Cox, but they can open their mouths and speak. They could threaten impeachment. There's a lot of things that they could do. They need to contact their county commissioners and tell them you can't certify an election until we resolve this issue, and mainly stop taking marching orders from Deidre Henderson as the lieutenant governor, because she's led you so far astray that now you're in real jeopardy of having committed a crime. And then I guess the other thing, to the SCC, the State Central Committee for the GOP, we've let them know if this goes forward and we end up with a Democrat governor, that's on them. That's on them. They're the ones that let this go forward. The State Records Committee, that's on them. The Judicial Committee, why not just give us the signatures? We're going on 6 months ago that we asked for these. I guess 5 months ago that we asked for the signatures. We went through all of the grammar requests. I mean, we've got 6 cases in court now. Spent a ton of money on this. We shouldn't have to do that, but because we're willing to do it, we just don't go away. After the primary, they thought, oh no, we're done with Phil, and we haven't gone away. And we picked up more momentum since the primary than we had ever before. It would be epic if we won a write-in campaign. That would be really amazing.
It would make history.
It would make history if that's
It would make history, and you already talked about how expensive it is to file this lawsuit. And thanks to people coming forward and assisting with the cost of it, you were able to get this done. Right. Everybody needs to reflect back on what Benjamin Franklin said right outside of the hall when the woman asked him notoriously, what type of government did you give us, Dr. Franklin? And he said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. So we're at a point in time in the United States, not just nationally, but at the state levels, where we're deciding whether we want a republic anymore. We do not have a democracy, people. This is not a one-on-one. A republic is you vote for people to represent you. And if the people in Utah are voting for someone to represent them that is cheating his way into the system, lying to you and refusing to take and show even the number of signatures, for crying out loud, and basically telling the Supreme Court to take a hike that he doesn't care because he's going to have a law, even though it's illegal. And again, remember, one of the rules here is that, and the Supreme Court justices have said this, if it violates the Constitution, it's illegal.
Right.
And the Supreme Court has already ruled on this. You don't get to change the rules. If you want to change the rules, we either shred the Constitution or you move to another country. And my understanding is it's relatively easy to cross borders these days.
Yeah, thanks to Spencer Cox.
Now, the reason for levity is I want to make this very clear to anybody, is not for me to distract and say these are not important issues. One of the strengths of a people is to be able to find a sense of humor in what's going on and understand that the validity of their statements and their arguments are so strong that you can kind of chuckle about some of it instead of taking the, oh my, the sky is falling. It's a recognition that you are intelligent enough as an individual to recognize the harm and you will take action upon the harm. And the joke is actually upon the individuals causing the harm.
Yes. And to speak to that, I'm going to have another action people can do. I'm going to make a website that it tells what crimes have possibly been committed, and report it to your local sheriffs, your local police, because they're crimes. And they may not do anything, but you're asking them, investigate this. Did this person put out a counterfeit ballot? Did this person commit mail fraud because she put it in the mail? I mean, we need to start reporting crimes and get a case number and ask them to investigate it. But it's show up to meetings, yeah, where you're going to have to maybe miss soccer games or whatever, but your children are going to have nothing in the future. So we have to stand up.
Would you want a doctor to take care of you who didn't get into medical college legitimately and had to cheat the system to get in? Would you want an attorney to represent you who didn't get into law college legitimately but had to cheat the system to get in? Do you want anybody? Do you want your pilot cheated the system to become a pilot to fly you? Do you want to get on that jet? The question you need to ask is, do you honestly want to have somebody represent the state of Utah who had to cheat to get in? Even if it's not illegal, take that off the board. If you have to cheat to win, you're a cheater. It's better to be second place, which is first loser. And anybody who's listening to me knows how much I think about that. But it is better to be first loser than to cheat winner.
For sure.
Oh,
So
I like that.
Yeah, and we need to stop accepting the narrative of, oh, we'll fix it next time. It's okay. Stop fixing
Now's the time to fix it.
Yeah.
You have a problem. Now is the time to fix it. Not next week, not next generation, not like we did in this country when Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. And here we are a half a century later dealing with the ramifications of it. He called for attention. People put it off. And this is part of why we're in the mess we are. You have a problem. You need to do housekeeping in the state of Utah before the rest of us have to deal with it. Because if somebody like myself gets in the position that I have, I will guarantee you it will be dealt with, and not in a comfortable way.
I like that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So one of the
Unfortunately.
things that was just discussed is, how do I fix this as a voter or as a resident?
Yeah.
And yes, going to events is helpful. Yes, making your voice heard by your legislators is helpful. But the number one thing you can do is use your agency, go out and vote for Phil Lyman, write him in and send a message. Phil can get in and change it then, or at least lobby the legislature to change it. But if you sit home or you hope somebody else is going to pick up this and run with it, you're wrong. You need to do it. And it's not a hard thing to do. They mail the damn ballots directly to you.
Yeah.
So grab a Bic and sit down and write in Phil Lyman.
Hey, I have a suggestion to add to that, Jim. Phil, you have a website where people can print off a flyer. I've actually done it. I've printed off hundreds of them. I have gone to my neighbors. I have dropped those flyers off on their doorstep, which explains the process to them. A lot of people are confused about this. Can we show Phil's website and get people to print off those flyers and just go in your neighborhood? I don't care if it's a Republican, Independent, or Democrat. Let's let the people know that Phil Lyman is in the game, that he needs to be written in. This has instruction on how to do it precisely so it will be counted. And it's easy to do. It's super easy to do. And in a couple of hours, you can cover a lot of ground. Take your dog on a walk and drop these off on people's doorsteps, because people need to know. And I think it can be done.
Steve, where is it on the website? Layton's got it up.
Ask Phil about that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's probably on that write-in campaign.
There's
I
the
was just
write-in
going to say
campaign.
write-in campaign.
Yeah, there's a flyer you can go to. and it's half page. You can print them out on your own printers in black and white, cut them in half.
Right there,
There it
how to
is.
write in Phil Lyman.
Yeah, cut them in half and just drop them on people's doorsteps. I go out in the evenings with my dog on Saturday, and
And
Good
and this
idea.
is right here. This is exactly what Jim said. He was going to fill in the bubble, so it was evident that it was there, and then he was going to write in the names, so it was evident it was there. It can't be ignored. One of the reasons why I pick on Jim so much is because I know that there's a fire in there that wants to light and tell people how important something is, and he always does it when I pick on him.
I will say
Because he
too,
wants,
Good to
he
know, Doc.
wants, what?
So good to know, Doc.
Well, and just remember, I have a master's in experimental psychology. So, the reality is when Jim is talking, he's thought about what he says before he presents it. And he's been re-emphasizing something that I want you to re-emphasize one more time. The very last thing that you told people about going out and voting and putting action to their words. So go, Jim, I want you to do that one more time for him, please.
Well, I just think that I hear a lot of people on a regular basis say, that's a great idea. I agree with you. And they do nothing about it. They can't even get up off their couch to go get a pen and write Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen on the ballot that was delivered to their mailbox. It takes zero effort, but your voice will be heard. And if you really think through this, even if Phil is unsuccessful in the write-in campaign, which is a heavy lift, it will send a message to every legislator in Utah to say, hey, look how many votes Phil got. Those people are going to vote for us, maybe, depending on our actions. And that's something I think has value.
And I'll tell you what else it has value in by doing that. When the Supreme Court takes a look at this case, one of the questions that are going to be in their minds are, did the people in Utah indicate that they were upset about this and would have put Lyman in there had this end run with SB 54 not been done? And if the people of Utah step forward and do that, not only may Mr. Lyman actually win this, which I think would be fantastic.
Outstanding.
Okay, outstanding. Or maybe you should be outstanding. Then the Supreme Court will look at that and they will go, you know what? We are going to reiterate what we did with the New York case, and we're going to use the fact that the people of Utah stood up and said they want the Constitution followed. They want the Supreme Court followed. They do not want illegal laws passed. And they have given us, the people of Utah have given us the permission, the encouragement, but the permission to say, here you go, Utah, strike SB 54. Thank you, Mr. Lyman, Ms. Clausen, for putting up the fight. And in this instance, Tracy for doing the work, Jim and Lori for doing the show, and Steve for coming to the show and helping to wake up people in Utah.
And Dr. Fleming, with what you said, we are frustrated. There's billboards going, all of us podcasters are putting it out there. I want to give a call out to a friend of mine at Eric Mootsauce. He is pounding the pavement and putting it out. And he actually got to spend some time with Eric Trump Jr. and he just spoke somewhere in Arizona. He sent me his little Instagram. I haven't listened to it yet, but I want to put a call out to all those people who are getting the word out there that Phil Lyman was cheated and SB4 should not be in the state of Utah.
But it's not Phil Lyman that was cheated. It was every voter that voted for him. The caucus system, the people that were elected by the caucus system to go represent them at the convention, they were cheated.
Yeah,
and shame on Rob Axon too.
Yeah, shame on him
out there.
And as Phil pointed out one time on one of his videos, he said, this isn't his election, it's ours. And they're currently stealing it. It's like we're being robbed, and it's happening right now. It's a crime in progress, and they are stealing this election from us. And it's not right, and it's embarrassing for Utah. We should stand up.
If I know Phil Lyman at all, and I think I do, Phil Lyman is not doing this for Phil Lyman. He would rather be attending his business, being with his grandkids and his kids. He's not doing this for himself. He's doing it because he knows it's the right thing to do. It's a calling that he probably heard in his heart from God, which is similar to experience I had, and that's why I'm involved. It's because I feel like I have to stand up for what's right. And that's why Phil is doing it at great personal cost to himself, I might add, in not only time, money, energy, you name it. He's not doing it for himself. Make no mistake about that.
I will say, I'll just say real quick, Laura, you know, there's so many people have jumped on this, and we knew there was going to be some miracles that took place. But what keeps me going on this is that there are so many other people who will not stop. After the primary, you know, a couple of candidates said, man, the primary was over and I never saw my people again. My people won't leave. They know that we're doing something important. The money that has been donated, you know, I've got little envelopes, you know, from children that, you know, gave me 70 cents. And it's like, it means something when that's happening. You look at that, it's like, well, I'm not going to. It's like, I don't have the luxury of just saying, yeah, I'm kind of tired. So, you know, Spencer Costa can just have this. We'll come back in 4 years. I don't have that luxury. Thank goodness.
Well, it's certainly a defining moment in not only Utah's history and what's going on here, but similarly in our country in general. And again, I applaud you, Phil, for and Tracy, amazing. And for day after day after day, just putting your neck on the line and pushing. And it's a great example for a lot of us.
Well, my wife Jody is sitting right over here. She's like a passenger. She reminds me all the time. I'm a passenger in this car. Yeah, I have to suffer all of your decisions.
Hi, Jody.
I'm supportive though, guys.
I want to say I know a lot of. We put the information up about the website, but I know a lot of people are just listening to it. And so I want to give the website out again so people can go and download flyers and go to your neighborhood and drop these off so they know that they can vote and write in Phil Lyman. So it's LYMAN 4 spelled out FOR Utah.com/write-in-campaign. Lyman4Utah.com/write-in-campaign. Please do that. The more people that do this, the better. People need to know that they can write Phil in, and it's got to happen. There's still 10 days plus. It's a lot of time.
That's a good point. And you know what? On top of it, so Dr. Richard Fleming he started a grassroots effort called 10letters.org, and it's the number 10. But even if you take the 10 letters scenario where you print 10 of those ballots out like Steve is talking about, and you go hand 10, and you ask each one of your friends to do 10, and you keep on asking them, you invite a friend to do 10. It doesn't take us hardly any time to go do 10 and then ask somebody within that 10, like, hey, can you do 10 more?
Yeah, and you meant flyers, not ballots.
Flyers,
Yeah.
yes. Sorry,
But you know,
flyers.
people should be looking at these ballots and say something's missing. What is it? Phil Lyman.
Yeah.
Yeah, or look at it and say, hey, you know what's missing? My vote as a Utah citizen.
Yeah.
Agree.
See? Always get Jim Gagin going.
So,
Well,
Phil, one
we
of
need
the
to
questions.
actually elect our officials and not have them selected for us.
Agreed.
How about anointed?
Yeah.
Agreed. So, Phil, Joe Watson has a question on can we demand a special election in January if somehow that Spencer Cox fights this through, even though we know, as like Dr. Fleming was saying, that it's still illegal regardless because of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling.
Well, if the
that he
Supreme
was
Court
talking
comes
about.
back on it, you're going to have another election.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've really tried to find out just from my own reading, and what I read was if a candidate is disqualified, then all the votes that are cast for that candidate are wasted votes. So in my just cursory thing, it says, well, if everybody votes for Spencer Cox, then he gets disqualified. Then the next highest vote getter would become the governor, which would be King. But to have
No, whoa! I
no,
just
no,
disagree with that. You have the
I disagree with
possibility
it.
of write-ins.
No, I disagree with it too. That's so I was saying this was kind of the narrative that we're going with, but you've got the write-in, and you also have if this is a criminal activity, then this election it has to be redone,
Well,
and we go back and do it.
And it wasn't just Phil that was harmed in this. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I had a friend that was harmed too because she was going for school state board and she was eliminated and she got over 60%. There is a Senate or U.S. senator. It was harmed, but he got over 60%. So it's just not Phil.
So now what you're saying, you've taken it one step further here, Tracy. You have just given an example of how SB 54 has been used, not just against Mr. Lyman, but in multiple instances to simply tell the voters nobody cares what they think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, let's use the national analogy. Joe Biden gets the votes. He gets the votes. They basically say, we don't want you running and put pressure on him. So he steps aside. So Kamala Harris, who had no votes, suddenly is, oh golly,
God help
potentially
us.
frighteningly President Giggles.
Well, Spencer Cox is our Kamala.
Yeah,
Great.
and I think you need to be looking at this way. All joking aside, this is not a laughing matter. This is the election process of Utah has been usurped.
Yep.
And more than once. And if you're willing to surrender your republic to whoever is in charge, then you do that. But I've been to Utah, and I don't think that's how the people of the state want to be seen. I think you have a tendency to want to fight back. I think most people in the United States have a tendency to want to fight back. This nasty tendency to want to hope that the system will work and we don't have to do anything has repeatedly been raised in the United States, where we have had to be reminded that which was given to us must be worked for if we are to have it ourselves and if we're to pass it on to our children and grandchildren. So, people in Utah, you don't have to pay any attention to me if you don't want to. Pretend you're my ex-wife. But the reality is, your state is at risk of being controlled by people that you didn't even want to be in that position to be controlled by.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Here's
not
your
a
chance to do
risk.
something about it.
I'll change that phraseology a little bit. It's happening. We're not at risk of it. It is happening, and it takes a Phil Lyman and others to stand up to put a stop to it.
Steve, that was a good comment, and Dr. Fleming too. I don't think people are born with courage. You learn courage when people are taking advantage of you. Now, I believe that some people don't have the ability to stand up because of whatever is keeping them down. Maybe they're afraid, maybe they don't know how to do it. But people have to get their heads out of the sand because our freedom is at jeopardy. The crime with all of the illegals, and that's a whole separate podcast. I mean, just here in Wasatch Valley alone, the crime is on the uptick. We now have like a gang symbols being sprayed on a wall with two Venezuelan gangs that are apparently saying, hey, we could live in this town together. That is all due with Spencer Cox. Like,
So
he
do
is
you now have
allowing
yard
this.
sign that say Venezuelans for Cox?
Yeah, but it's in
Yes.
Spanish.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Then I won't
So-
be able to read it.
We have to stand up. I say a vote for Spencer Cox is a throwaway vote because it won't get us back to our conservative values. It gives us more of that left side bullshit liberal stuff with a rhino. I know you might not like that word, with a rhino that is in office right now who is not for the people. When you're using, again, he, him, whatever it is, men don't do that.
No, they don't.
Oh, we don't.
So get your head out of the sand, people. We all have to find our own courage. Print
So-
out the flyer, drop it off at 10 people, and ask one of those 10 people to drop off 10 more.
100. 100 people.
So something Steve said earlier about there's this, I don't want to step out of line. I don't want to, offend anybody. I just go along and get along was how I took it.
You know, the 1930s Nazi Germany had that same problem.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is that the LDS Church believes the Constitution is divinely inspired. Joseph Smith, Ezra Taft, Benson, and it was they believed it was the duty of the citizenry to uphold the Constitution as it was divinely inspired by God. So you're not bucking the trend. You're supporting the Constitution.
Right, and we're required to do that. We have a duty to do that. And it is interesting that the deference that we show to authority and leadership, and when that gets twisted and used to kind of manipulate you, it's really offensive. And if anybody, if you've got genuine authority and you've got false authority, and we're being expected to disagree better with false authority, that should be offensive to members of the church instead of saying, oh, that sounds kind of like what we do in the church. It's like a 21st century brand of communism that's coming into the United States. And I genuinely think they look at Utah and say, that's a place we could really roll out some of these policies, and whether it's immigration or housing or climate or all these things, because of this deference to authorities. You're right on, Jim. And I'm a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I do not see that as a conflict in my faith, to stand up for yourself, to stand up for your kids. I always say honest people have rights too. That little girl in the bathroom, she's got a right to be there without having a man come in. And anyone that thinks that they're being compassionate by letting illegal aliens take over our state, they're not being compassionate to those people, and they're certainly not being compassionate to the people of Utah. It's astonishing that you have that narrative, but it's being pushed by that syndicate, by that group of people, by this small minority, and they push it. The media jumps on it. Everybody's behind it. It's really, really powerful. And I think it's done. I think it's run its course. I really do. I hope.
As we're wrapping up, Phil will give you the last words on here, but I know that we had a problem with the election where we literally had thousands of ballots that were shipped to Vegas, and they were never counted on I guess the primary. Can you just talk a little bit about that and express how important it is to walk your ballot in? Don't put it in the mail. because you can't verify your vote has been counted.
Yeah, we're dealing with such a flawed system. Talking about the chain of custody, and you lose chain of custody when you drop it in the mail. If you drop it in the Dropbox, you lose chain of custody. You take it to the clerk's office and leave it with them. You really lose chain of custody. But you mail it, and you're guaranteed you're going to lose chain of custody on several different places. You do have the ability to go into the website, vote.utah.gov, I think it is, put in your information, and they will record. You can see that, oh, my ballot was at least booked as having been received by the clerk. So as much as I dislike, I would not mail it. I would take it and put it in a Dropbox. But whether you mail it or put it in a Dropbox, make sure that you do it in enough time so that you can check that website and see, yes, my ballot's in. And if it doesn't go in, then you should be down at the clerk's office, a couple of days before the election saying, what's going on? I put this through a week ago or whatever.
And I would encourage in-person voting. I mean, we're Americans. Let's celebrate it. Let's embrace it. It's our right to vote. Let's celebrate and go and vote in person if you can.
Kind of like the olden days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday, and voted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Despite everybody telling me not to go early. And my response was, I think everybody decided to go in yesterday. And they said, oh no, Monday. They were, so, I mean, Houston has a tremendous turnout. And, there's an amazing thing that you can do in line that you can't do when you mail it in. Do you know what that is, everybody?
What?
Yeah, you can talk to other people that are actually in line.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's a social skill. I know we're getting away from it. And
it's pretty scary.
As I've told people, I've always been in favor of the 6-foot rule even before it was in. But that being aside, we had some interesting conversations, and it was kind of interesting to see people that were significantly older than me with walkers, and part of me wants to just comment that if you can look at people that are in their 80s and 90s that are moving along ever so slowly with their walkers, and they can get out and go vote, you don't have a legitimate reason not to, unless you don't want to have any say in the type of country you're living in which case, quit complaining about it.
Yep.
Well put.
If I can just say one more thing, Lori, and it's so important to have voices that speak up. I love it when someone outside of Utah, outside the echo chamber, is willing to weigh in and say, holy smokes, what's going on in Utah? This is not right. So thank you, Dr. Fleming, for that. And thanks, Lori and Jim, Steve, especially thanks for, Tracy, for all the work on this. It's a huge effort. And we have seen miracles happening almost daily in this campaign. And I don't put that lightly. It's like massive revelations that are coming out. And I believe that God, likes effort. And if you're staying there, if you're in the fight, you're going to see amazing things happen, and we have. And so thank you. That's all
Thank you for fighting this.
Yeah.
So thank you, Phil. Thank you, Tracy, Steve, Jim, for all you do. Dr. Fleming, for all you do on the 10letters.org and everything that you're fighting for in Slovakia and everything. I'm really honored to have had this podcast with all of you. So
Donuts next time.
yeah.
For
Well,
Jim.
I'll tell you
Jim.
what, when Phil wins, we'll fly you in and we'll do a donut party.
Yes.
At Phil's house.
Yeah, you do understand. I'm not going to have any of them, but it's for Jim.
Don't steal my joy.
No, you can have mine. I'm sorry.
So Phil and Tracy, thank you so much. Our prayers go out. We're praying, we're praying for November 5th. We will keep pounding the pavement. I know that Steve is pounding the pavement. We will do it. And I know that Dr. Fleming is doing it from Texas. So good night for now from the Wellness Crusaders. And I wish you all a good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Write in Phil Lyman.
Yes.
Good call. Right in Phil Lyman.
Thank you all.